It has always been a big question. What determines how we perceive reality? Well, books have been written about that, courses have been given, so we may understand that we are not within this short video going into much details. What I would like to do is to indicate a few principles, some key elements that play a role. And if that triggers curiosity, a certain longing to understand more of how you perceive reality, of course you can then explore the different aspects. So don't expect a extensive explanation, but we are going to look at those elements, and that are our brains, that plays a role. And the key is brains with an S, and not the different parts of the brain in our head. No, we have 3 brains. But let's look first at the one in our head. And although there are different parts, we have the primal brain, and we have the midbrain or the limbic system, and we have the neocortex. When we talk about perception, the one that is ultimately translating all the information into a perception, that are the 2 hemispheres. And what is important is to understand that those 2 hemispheres, the left and the right one, have their own unique way of perceiving reality. And there is where a lot of confusion is coming from. Of course, those 2 are supposed to work together, and they do that through the corpus callosum. That's the greenish part that you see in this image. So what are those 2 different hemispheres standing for? What do they do? What's the difference? Well, there are many ways to look at it, but I like to start with this particular image because it helps to at least get some basic things, and then I will add a few things. So if you go to the left hemisphere, this is connected to the right half of our body, what we see is, and it is beautiful illustrated here, I think, that is the logic part. And it's logical, sequential, you see all those different words. It's analytical, it's verbal, is where our language is, factual. And the other part is, well, they summarize it under creativity, but it's the imaginative part, the non-verbal part, the intuitive part, and all these creative elements and emotional elements and artistic elements. That is part of that one. But that is only, from my perspective, a part of the story. The left hemisphere, because it has those characteristics, has the tendency to look at the parts. And it believes that if you understand the parts, you understand the whole. Or to say it differently, the left hemisphere says that, the whole is a summation of the parts. And you can call that the mechanical view of our system and of the world. While the right hemisphere is saying everything is related. There's only one interactive dynamic system. And that from the left hemisphere, that is rather chaotic, and I think it's nicely illustrated here. Nonetheless, they're connected. And then the connection, as I already mentioned, is the corpus callosum. You can also look at it from a different perspective and say, okay, that right hemisphere is the feminine, the left is the masculine, and the corpus callosum is the child, the ones that brings you together in a harmonious understanding of the totality. So these are already some of the key elements, as you now understand, of how we perceive. Are we predominantly perceiving from the left or from the right? And unfortunately, in our society, the tendency is to train mostly the left hemisphere and not the right one. So the logic part, we talk about languages and communication, that kind of things, verbal, analytical. So that is the tendency. Left is dominant. And because left is not able to see the whole, in a proper way, it's easy then to, let's say, forget that certain things have a certain effect on the whole because we don't see that. And that's why it's so important that we develop that right hemisphere, because that says immediately, hey, wait a minute, you haven't looked at the whole. And as a consequence, the whole is not optimally functioning anymore because of the disturbances that are taking place. And that is the key in the whole dynamic. But there is a little bit more. And for that, I have this image, and that is the brain frequencies. There's a lot again that can be said about it, but I like to again go to the basic principles. There are a number of frequencies that literally makes it into a reception system. You receive information on all kinds of frequencies from all kinds of realms, visible or invisible, and that needs then to be translated into a perception, and there is a combination between those frequencies. So basically, when we talk about the way we function, then we function mostly from the beta frequencies. And then there are also the frequencies that really stimulate the use of that left hemisphere. If you want to make that optimal, you need to be in a relaxed state, the alpha state, and that is the combination that a lot of people begin to recognize is important. So there are now trainings for athletes and managers to combine those two because you're more efficient. But if you want to see the whole more properly, then we need to go into the theta and gamma frequencies combination. And the theta is also the dream state. So why can't we not understand our dreams? Because we interpret it from the beta frequency and not from the gamma. And the beta is logic, so it doesn't understand messages that are not based on logic. So you see in this image that there are more combinations. I'm not going into all that because this is not where we most of the time are. But it indicates what a tremendous potential we have, where we can expand our ability to receive and expand our ability to perceive. And only way to do that is there is sufficient balance between those two hemispheres. To help you a little bit more to understand, we live in the fourth world, and there are 3 levels of consciousness connected with that. The first level is a healthy I, developing a healthy I. If you don't have let's say, a healthy ego, you will not function properly. But most of us have an unhealthy ego, and as a consequence, we are in a survival strategy. The second level is the we, the collaboration, where we see equality between people that work together in a certain setting. If you don't see equality and go about, I'm the boss, then we miss the point. You may have different functions and different responsibilities, but every part of an organization is equally important, or it wouldn't be there. And then ultimately we have this all, where you can see the totality. Well, that is a nice description, of course, of the right hemisphere. So you see that the first two are very often mostly connected to the left hemisphere. Now this can be expanded. The third world we used to know as Atlantis. It still exists, but it is beyond our senses, so we think it doesn't exist. Same is true for the second one that used to be known as Lemuria, and the first one I even don't know. But what you see is that it expands consciousness, but it also the different frequencies that can be used. So you can look, if you really are interested in that, you can stop the video and look in more detail at those different frequencies. But it is all to help you that the totality of our world, which exists out of 4 frequency systems, can be seen and understand through our brains, but we need to stimulate the development of certain brain frequencies. And all of that contributes to how we perceive the totality of our world. But there is another aspect to it. While everybody, when we talk about the brain, everybody goes immediately to that complex system in our head. Well, that brain, as you may understand now is the translation system, right? Translating information into perception, but it gets its information from different places. One of the places it gets it from is from the heart. The heart has a brain. Oh, it doesn't have the billions of neurons that we have in our head with all these interesting connections. The estimation is that there are about 40,000 neurons in our heart, but it is a brain that receives. And it receives the spiritual messages that needs to be then translated into a perception. But it's not the only other brain that exists. The other one is the one that is in our intestinal tract. And it is interesting that nowadays everybody's talking about the gut-brain axis. You know, there's far less talking about the heart-brain axis, although there are certain institutions and people that definitely do that. But the reason that there is so much emphasis on the gut-brain connection is because of the microbiome that many believe is stimulating our brain in the guts. And that is a much larger brain even than the heart. It has hundreds of millions of neurons. So you may understand that there's a lot of information coming in through the two brains, especially also the gut brain, and is all sent to that brain complex in our head to be translated. Now, how do the two hemispheres relate to those brains? And that is the final image. If you look at the right hemisphere, primarily the information from the heart, the spiritual information, goes into the right hemisphere and helps us to understand and see the whole. Look beyond the logic stuff of our daily life. While the gut brain is sending it primarily to the left hemisphere, or let's say influence mostly, it's mostly processed in the left hemisphere. So the gut is stimulating the brain through the left hemisphere to be in that survival strategy. So if you have a lot of experiences that we have not fully processed, a lot of that is in the information in the gut, and it's giving those signals to the left, mostly to the left hemisphere, that keeps it into the dominant one that is in the survival. The right hemisphere doesn't care about survival. It cares about the beauty of the interconnectedness of everything. And the heart helps us. You may understand that ultimately those systems need to work together. And that's the double arrow that you see, the corpus callosum, that bridges the left and the right hemisphere. So in summary, you see that the way we perceive is depending on the kind of signals and the kind of signals that we are processing, because we are not processing everything, we will process only a part, is depending on the experiences we have had. If we have had a lot of, let's say, difficult experiences that makes that we avoid certain things, then that will influence, of course, the way we function. Ultimately, we are invited to be open for all the information that reaches us, to the degree that we need to process it in order to function optimally. That is not the logic left hemisphere. It is the right hemisphere that helps us to do that. And then the left hemisphere can give it form. Perception will change all the time because we are never the same person. We always are evolving. And in that evolution, we stimulate actually the different frequency of the brain so we can process more. Still, all this information is coming in. What I didn't include is the information that comes in through the senses. And there's other ways that information is coming in. So I restricted to the main system, the basic principles. The senses actually feed mostly the left hemisphere. But if you have the intuitive one, then it stimulates more the right hemisphere. So those who can see beyond extrasensory perception That is helping to see the larger picture. We have a lot to develop to not only shift our perception, but to go to what I call our optimal state. What I have just described are some of the principles that play a role, and I hope it stimulates you to explore a little bit more for yourself. It's a fun journey if we choose to make it a fun journey.